The International Court of Justice, the top court of the United Nations, has given Myanmar a stern warning. Yesterday, it ordered that government to do everything possible to prevent all acts that amount to or contribute to the genocide of the country's Rohingya Muslims. Myanmar has also been told to report back to the tribunal in 4 months with the steps it has taken to comply with the ruling. About 2 months ago, Gambia filed a case against Myanmar with the court, accusing the country of genocide against Rohingyas, and so far more than 700,000 Rohingya have fled Myanmar to Bangladesh after a military-led crackdown in 2017. My next guest is with a group that has been watching this case. Farid Khan is Director of Advocacy and Media Relations for the Rohingya Human Rights Network, and he's with me in studio this afternoon. Hi there.
Hi.
What do you make of ICJ's ruling?
It's a huge victory after such a long struggle. Rohingya around the world are celebrating this victory. They know it's the start of a process, not the end of a process. There were Rohingya who were there in the courtroom as the judgment was read out. And what is notable was that it was a unanimous decision, and that in the ruling, the ICJ judges cited 4 of the 5 criteria that constitute genocide, which Myanmar has perpetrated against the Rohingya.
And, I mean, I emphasize that this the criteria has been around for quite a while. This is not specifically for this case. So
yeah, this is like it's under the Genocide Convention, which was ratified by the UN General Assembly in 1948.
The Myanmar government has rejected the ruling, though. It admitted war crimes happened, but under investigation, since the ICJ doesn't have any power to enforce its own rulings. Do you see Myanmar complying at all? I mean, if they're saying, yes, war crimes happened under investigation, but we don't buy into the ruling, why would they comply?
Well, exactly, and that's the thing, and that's why I'm saying it's the first step. It's a victory, it's a moral victory, but now it's up to nations like Canada to step up and say that that the ICJ is part of the international legal order, which Canada has said repeatedly that it supports, that it's a rule of law nation, it supports the international rule of law, and this is one of the key instruments of the United Nations and the international rule of law, the ICJ. And if nations are free to reject rulings against them, then basically that would lead to a breakdown of the international legal order. So nations like Canada, its allies, Western democracies primarily, who are the architects of the international legal order and who say they believe in it, it's up to them to step up and say, no, we're not having any of this. You went to the court, you legitimized the court by appearing before it, you had your head of government appear before it, present your case, so you now can't go and then say, we don't accept the ruling. Myanmar could have said, you know what, we don't believe in the court, even though we signed the genocide treaty, we don't believe in the court, and we're not going to be there to defend ourselves. Other nations have done that. Myanmar decided to go. They sent their top politician. And so, they very, in action, they legitimized the legal status of the court. And so to now say that they're not going to, or that they don't accept the decision and maybe they won't implement the decision, that should be very worrying for Canada and for other nations.
But when you say Canada step up, what does that mean? What should Canada and other nations do to enforce something that as we say, ICJ doesn't have the power to enforce? Yes,
well, now it goes to the United Nations. So if Canada wants to play a major role at the United Nations, like it's been saying it wants to, if it wants to support the international legal order, now it has to take this to the United Nations. It has to work with its allies. Back in December, when the case was before the court, when Gambia was presenting, Canada and Netherlands issued a joint statement saying they support this case. And just after the decision, the Foreign Affairs Minister, Mr. Champagne, as well as his parliamentary secretary, came out and said that Canada supports this decision by the ICJ, and they will now see what they can do to help further this decision. So now we're waiting to see what the government is going to do in terms of actual actions, internationally and with its allies.
What are its options? What are any nation who wants to take a stand against this option that would actually have an effect with Myanmar being able to follow the ruling?
Well, I think first step is look at real sanctions, not just targeted sanctions under the Magnitsky Act, but real sanctions that affect the enterprises that the politicians and the military leaders are deeply involved in. Look at the banking system, where a lot of the political and military leaders of Myanmar have their funds ensconced in banks overseas. Find ways to freeze them. Use the same sort of methods against Myanmar that have been used against Iran. They have frozen assets in overseas jurisdictions. They have cut trade. They have imposed actual hard sanctions that have hurt the economy. And, some people will say, well, we don't want to go that far. But the thing is, if you have a rogue player in the international legal order, then you've got to use harsh tactics in order to make sure that they follow the rule of law, especially after a decision like the ICJ sent down.
Do you think there's a willingness for Canada to do that, though? Because Canadian House of Commons agreed to call the killings of Rohingyas a genocide. It's urged Myanmar to comply with the court's ruling. I don't exactly know what urge means in this situation, but do you think there's a willingness for that tougher stance that you're talking about on the part of the Canadian government right now?
Well, that's that requires me to get inside of the head of the Prime Minister and his cabinet. And, honestly, I don't know. But we are going to continue to maintain our pressure. We've got allies in both the Parliament and in the Senate, as well as civil society organizations across the country. Major ones like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International have called for Canada to take action. We have been calling for 2 years, along with our allies, for the Canadian government to invoke the Genocide Convention, which it didn't, but now it still has an opportunity to redeem itself by joining the Gambia case in some fashion, because the case is just starting. This is just, interim measures. The actual case has not been presented yet, so there is still a way for Canada to get involved. And in terms of having the Canadian government act, we're going to use every tool at our disposal to make sure that pressure is put on the Prime Minister and Cabinet and the Foreign Affairs Minister to make a substantive decision with respect to helping the Rohingya. You can't say you're part of the legal order. You can't say that you're a rule of law nation, but then when a case is presented to you where the rule of law is threatened, you basically, wash your hands of it and stand back and say, well, no, that's not my issue.
Lastly, if Myanmar ends up following it, if it ends up feeling the pressure of the nations, or for whatever reason ends up following it, how is it really going to affect those Rohingyas who have already fled from Myanmar to Bangladesh, do you think?
Well, right now it's not going to affect them, but the thing is that if you watched any of the videos coming out of the refugee camps over the last couple of days, there was this feeling of euphoria among the Rohingya that finally, internationally, their humanity has been recognized. I mean, it's a pretty sad statement that it would take a decision of a court to recognize the humanity of a people, or to recognize the fact that they have been victims of genocide. I mean, the evidence has been there for years. So, right now, in terms of immediate effects, it's not going to do anything to remove the impoverished state that they're living in within the refugee camps, but it will give them hope, and it'll give them that there is a sense of justice and that justice will be done. This is the smallest sliver of justice because it is the very start of the process. But the fact that the court came out so strongly, and it was a unanimous decision, it sent just a wave of happiness if you watch any of the videos from the camps.
Farid Khan, thanks very much.
Thank you for having me.
Farid Khan is Director of Advocacy and Media Relations for the Rohingya Human Rights Network. Thoughts on what he had to say, all in a day at cbc.ca is our email address. You can also always tweet us, CBC, all in a day.